London, 1845. The Duke of Harrowsby, Zachary Westmoreland, stared at the anonymous letter on his desk with a mixture of irritation and intrigue. The handwriting was elegant, feminine, and utterly unfamiliar. For the third month running, these mysterious missives had arrived, each one more incisive than the last, offering unsolicited commentary on his public appearances and political positions. "Your Grace appears to champion the Factory Act in Parliament," the letter read, "yet invests heavily in manufacturing concerns known for their deplorable conditions. One wonders if your lordship's heart knows what his hands are doing." Zachary's jaw clenched. No one, certainly no woman, had dared speak to him with such impertinence since his elevation to the dukedom 7 years prior. Yet these letters, delivered by some unknown means to his private study, continued their gentle but unmistakable indictment of his character. He crumpled the paper, then thought better of it, smoothing it carefully before tucking it into the Morocco leather folder where he kept the others. Whoever this mystery correspondent was, she knew too much about his affairs for comfort. That she expressed herself with the wit and clarity of a seasoned writer only compounded his frustration. "Forrester," he called, and his secretary appeared instantly. "I want to know who's delivering these letters. Post a footman if necessary, but find out." "Yes, Your Grace." Beyond the window of his Mayfair townhouse, London bustled with early spring activity. Ladies in crinolines and gentlemen in frock coats navigated the streets below, while Zachary remained trapped in his gilded cage of privilege and expectation. At 32, he was considered the most eligible bachelor in London, his wealth surpassed only by his influence in Parliament. Yet he had never felt more alone. Across London, in a modest but respectable home in Bloomsbury, Miss Genevieve Whitcomb sat at her writing desk, quill poised above paper. Her younger sister, Amelia, burst into the room without knocking. "Another letter to your Duke?" she asked, her 17-year-old eyes dancing with mischief. Genevieve set down her pen. "He is not my Duke, Amelia, and I'll thank you to remember that. Besides, you promised not to mention my correspondence to anyone." "And I haven't," Amelia protested, collapsing dramatically onto the settee. "But you must admit, it's terribly romantic. A spinster challenging a powerful duke through anonymous letters." "I am 28, not ancient," Genevieve replied dryly. "And there is nothing romantic about holding a man accountable for his hypocrisy. Besides, father would be mortified if he knew." Their father, Dr. Jonathan Whitcomb, was a respected physician whose patients included several aristocratic families. Their modest but comfortable life depended entirely on his reputation. "Is that why you never sign your name?" Amelia teased. "Fear of father's disapproval? Or perhaps you're secretly hoping the handsome Duke will be intrigued enough to discover your identity?" Genevieve ignored her sister's implications. "I don't sign my name because truth stands on its own merit, not on the authority of its speaker. Besides, who would listen to the opinions of a physician's spinster daughter?" "The same people who devour your essays in the Ladies' Quarterly," Amelia countered. "You write under a pseudonym there, too, but everyone knows a GW is becoming quite influential." Genevieve sighed. Her modest success as an essayist under the initials GW brought her satisfaction, but little income. Her pieces on women's education and social reform had garnered a faithful readership, though none suspected the author was female. "The Duke would never read such publications," Genevieve said firmly. "Now, I must finish this before father returns for dinner." After Amelia left, Genevieve returned to her letter. What had begun as a single outraged note after witnessing the Duke's callous dismissal of a factory reform petition had evolved into a strange correspondence, though entirely one-sided. She had never expected her first letter to reach him, much less that she would continue writing. But something compelled her to challenge this powerful man whose actions affected thousands. She never imagined how dramatically their lives would soon intertwine. 2 weeks later, Zachary found himself at Lady Pembroke's literary salon, an event he normally avoided. Society gatherings bored him, but his aunt, Lady Augusta, had insisted he attend. "You need a wife, Zachary," she declared that morning in his study. "And you won't find one hiding behind parliamentary reports. "I have no interest in the simpering debutantes paraded before me season after season," he'd replied. "Then perhaps you'll find a woman of substance at Clarissa Pembroke's salon. She invites writers and intellectuals alongside the usual society figures." Now, surveying the crowded drawing room, Zachary doubted his aunt's wisdom. Lady Pembroke's salon appeared to be the same collection of aristocrats and social climbers he encountered everywhere else, merely discussing books rather than horses or hunting. "Your Grace," Lady Pembroke approached, leading a tall, poised woman with intelligent eyes. "May I present Miss Whitcomb? Her father tends to Lord Wexford's family." Zachary bowed perfunctorily. "Miss Whitcomb." "Your Grace." Her curtsy was proper, but minimal. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, modest compared to the elaborate confections around her, yet far more elegant. "Miss Whitcomb contributes to several periodicals," Lady Pembroke continued. "Under a nom de plume, of course." "Indeed?" Zachary raised an eyebrow. "And what subjects inspire your pen, Miss Whitcomb?" "Social inequities, Your Grace. Factory conditions. Educational reform." Her direct gaze was unusual in a woman. "Matters that affect those with less privilege than ourselves." Something in her articulation caught his attention. "You speak as one with first-hand knowledge." "I observe, Your Grace. An ability available to anyone who troubles to use their eyes." Lady Pembroke, sensing tension, smoothly intervened. "Miss Whitcomb recently published a most thought-provoking piece on the Factory Act amendments." "I should like to read it," Zachary said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "It appeared in the Ladies' Quarterly," Miss Whitcomb replied. "Though I doubt such publications find their way to ducal libraries." Before he could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Lord Cunningham, a notorious rake whose appearance caused a flutter among the unmarried ladies. "Westmoreland," Cunningham nodded. "And who is your charming companion?" "Miss Whitcomb," Lady Pembroke supplied. "A contributor to several respected journals." "A blue-stocking, eh?" Cunningham's smile did not reach his eyes. "How progressive of you, Westmoreland." Lord Cunningham believes female intellect exists solely for his amusement, Zachary found himself saying. A stance that reveals more about his limitations than those of the fairer sex. Miss Whitcomb's eyes widened slightly, while Cunningham's face darkened. "You'll excuse me," the Lord muttered before retreating. "Thank you, Your Grace," Miss Whitcomb said after a moment. "Though I assure you, I've weathered worse condescension." "I've no doubt. Cunningham represents the worst of our class." "Only one variety of its worst," she replied with unexpected sharpness. "There are many ways privilege can corrupt." Their eyes met, and Zachary felt an uncomfortable sensation of being assessed and found wanting. He was unaccustomed to such scrutiny, particularly from a woman of modest background. "I believe my sister requires my attention," Miss Whitcomb said, glancing toward a younger woman across the room. "Good evening, Your Grace." As she walked away, Zachary found himself inexplicably drawn to her retreating figure. There was something familiar in her manner of expression, something that nagged at his memory. The evening proceeded with tedious predictability until Zachary overheard a conversation between two matrons partially concealed behind a potted palm. "Can you imagine the scandal?" one whispered. "Dr. Whitcomb's practice would be ruined." "Writing political essays is unseemly enough for a woman," replied the other, "but those anonymous letters to the Duke cross every boundary of propriety." Zachary froze, straining to hear more. "How do you know of these letters?" the first woman asked. "My lady's maid is friendly with the Whitcomb's housekeeper. Apparently, Miss Whitcomb has been sending His Grace anonymous critiques of his political positions and business affairs for months." The conversation shifted to other gossip, but Zachary remained rooted in place, his mind racing. Could Miss Whitcomb be his mystery correspondent? The thought was both infuriating and strangely exhilarating. He searched the room for her and found her in conversation with an elderly gentleman near the refreshment table. Watching her animated expressions, he tried to reconcile this respectable doctor's daughter with the bold, incisive writer who had been challenging him through anonymous letters. As the evening concluded, Zachary made a decision. If Genevieve Whitcomb was indeed his mystery correspondent, he would confront her, but not here. This game of anonymous criticism would end on his terms. The following afternoon found Genevieve walking through the British Museum's Egyptian exhibition, sketchbook in hand. These solitary excursions provided respite from household duties and inspiration for her writing. The hieroglyphics suggest a culture preoccupied with recording even the minutest details of daily life. Came a familiar voice behind her. Not unlike certain anonymous letter writers of my acquaintance. Genevieve turned slowly to find the Duke of Harrowsby regarding her with an intensity that sent her heart racing. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal frock coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," she managed, executing a curtsy. "I wasn't aware you frequented the museum." "I contain multitudes, Miss Whitcomb." "As it seems, do you?" He gestured to the gallery bench. "Might we sit?" "I believe we have matters to discuss." Panic fluttered in her chest. "I cannot imagine what business would require private discussion between us." "Can't you?" His voice lowered. "Perhaps I should be more direct. I've received several anonymous letters over recent months. Letters displaying remarkable knowledge of my affairs and expressing opinions with a distinctive literary flair." Genevieve's face betrayed nothing, though her pulse thundered in her ears. "London abounds with writers and critics, Your Grace." "Indeed. Yet few would have both the courage to challenge a duke and the discretion to do so anonymously." His eyes, a striking shade of green she hadn't noticed at Lady Pembroke's, fixed on hers. Fewer still would use the precise phrase "moral obligation transcends class boundaries" both in such correspondence and in conversation at a literary salon. Her mind raced. Had she been so careless? She had indeed used that phrase when discussing factory reform with Lord Tennyson last evening. "You've been investigating me," she said flatly. Investigating is perhaps too formal a term for recognizing one's anonymous critic. His expression softened unexpectedly. "I must know, Miss Whitcomb." "Why me? Why not address your concerns through your published works?" The genuine curiosity in his voice surprised her. "Your publications reach different audiences," she admitted after a moment. "My essays might influence public opinion gradually, but you have the power to effect immediate change. Yet you seem content to maintain traditions that harm those beneath you." "Beneath me?" His eyebrow arched. "Your choice of words reveals your own prejudice, Miss Whitcomb." "My choice of words reflects reality, Your Grace. You sit in the House of Lords. You own factories where children work 12-hour days. Your investments support colonial enterprises built on exploitation. You presume to know a great deal about my affairs." "I research thoroughly before forming opinions," she replied. A habit more gentlemen might benefit from adopting. To her astonishment, the Duke laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his austere features. "Touché, Miss Whitcomb. Though I wonder if your research extended to my recent testimony before the Factory Commission, or my voting record on the latest reform bills." Uncertainty flickered across her face. "Perhaps," he continued, "your thorough research overlooked my gradual divestment from certain manufacturing concerns, or my anonymous donations to the Educational Reform Society." Genevieve felt heat rise to her cheeks. If such actions exist, why hide them? Why present one face to society and another in private? "Why indeed?" he countered softly. "I might ask you the same question, Miss Whitcomb. Or should I address you as G.W., the celebrated essayist?" The conversation paused as a group of visitors passed by, their voices echoing against the marble floors. "You know I am G.W., she said when they were alone again. "I suspected at Lady Pembroke's. I confirmed it this morning after visiting several publishing houses." He smiled slightly at her evident alarm. "Fear not, your secret remains safe. I merely wished to understand who had appointed herself my moral conscience. And now that you know. Now I find myself faced with a dilemma. What does one do when confronted with a brilliant mind hiding behind both a respectable facade and anonymous criticism? One typically uses one's considerable influence to silence such impertinence, she answered warily. Is that what you expect of me? His expression grew serious. To threaten your father's practice or expose your writings? It would be the typical aristocratic response. Then perhaps I am not a typical aristocrat. He stood, extending his hand to help her rise. I propose an alternative, Miss Whitcomb. Dinner, at my home, where we might discuss our apparently mutual interest in reform without the constraints of public scrutiny. Genevieve stared at his offered hand. That would be most improper. My aunt will chaperone, naturally. Lady Augusta shares many of your views on education, though perhaps not your methods of advocacy. His lips quirked in amusement. I simply wish to continue our conversation in a setting where honesty might prevail. Against her better judgment, Genevieve found herself intrigued. And if I decline? Then you're free to continue your anonymous correspondence, though I'll warn you that knowing the author's identity will color my reading of future letters. He paused. I give you my word as a gentleman that no harm will come to you or your family regardless of your decision. She studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. Very well, Your Grace. I accept your invitation, though I cannot imagine what will come of it. Nor can I, Miss Whitcomb. Something in his gaze made her breath catch. But I find myself unexpectedly eager to discover the possibilities. Harrowsby House dominated its Mayfair Square with imposing grandeur. As Genevieve ascended the marble steps beside her father, invited as a courtesy to propriety, she regretted her impulsive acceptance of the Duke's invitation. I still don't understand why the Duke of Harrowsby would invite us to dinner, Dr. Whitcomb muttered, adjusting his cravat nervously. I've never treated his family. We met at Lady Pembroke's salon, Genevieve reminded him. His Grace expressed interest in educational reform. Since when does Zachary Westmoreland care about education? Her father wondered. His father was known for his opposition to the Education Act. Before Genevieve could respond, the massive doors opened to reveal a liveried butler who ushered them into an entrance hall the size of their entire home. Portraits of stern-faced Westmorelands looked down from walls adorned with silk damask. Dr. and Miss Whitcomb, the butler intoned, leading them into a drawing-room where the Duke and an elderly woman awaited. Dr. Whitcomb, Miss Whitcomb. The Duke bowed, then gestured to his companion. May I present my aunt, Lady Augusta Westmoreland? Lady Augusta, a handsome woman of perhaps 60 with shrewd eyes and an elegant bearing, appraised Genevieve openly. So you're the one who's been writing to my nephew, she said without preamble. I must say, you're younger than I expected. Genevieve's face flamed as her father turned to her in confusion. Aunt, the Duke admonished, though amusement tinged his voice. We've not yet broached that subject. Nonsense, Zachary. If we're to have an honest conversation, let's dispense with pretense. Lady Augusta gestured for them to sit. Dr. Whitcomb, your daughter has been sending my nephew anonymous letters challenging his positions on various social issues. Rather than taking offense, he's chosen to engage with her ideas directly. Dr. Whitcomb's expression shifted from confusion to horror. Genevieve, is this true? I'm afraid so, father. Genevieve straightened her shoulders. Though His Grace has been remarkably understanding about the impertinence. Understanding, her father spluttered. Genevieve, one does not write anonymous critiques to a duke. Your Grace, I must apologize for my daughter's behavior. I assure you, no apology necessary, Dr. Whitcomb, Zachary interrupted smoothly. Your daughter's letters were impassioned but not improper. Indeed, they've prompted me to reconsider several positions. They have? Genevieve couldn't mask her surprise. You sound astonished, Miss Whitcomb. A smile played at his lips. Did you write merely to vent your frustration, or did you harbor some hope of influence? Before she could answer, dinner was announced. As they processed to the dining room, Genevieve felt distinctly off balance. This was not proceeding as she had anticipated. The meal was served with silent efficiency by footmen who seemed to anticipate every need. Conversation flowed surprisingly easily, with Lady Augusta revealing herself to be a staunch advocate for women's education. Dr. Whitcomb, initially uncomfortable, gradually relaxed as the Duke engaged him on medical reforms. "Your daughter mentioned you serve on the hospital board," Zachary said. "I'd be interested in your thoughts on the sanitation proposals before Parliament." As the men discussed healthcare, Genevieve found Lady Augusta studying her with undisguised interest. "You've unsettled my nephew," the older woman said quietly. "Few manage that feat. It wasn't my intention to unsettle him," Genevieve replied. "Merely to point out inconsistencies between his public positions and private investments." "And why should his consistency matter to you, Miss Whitcomb?" Lady Augusta's tone was curious rather than accusatory. Genevieve considered her answer carefully. "Because those with power bear responsibility for its exercise. His Grace's decisions affect thousands who have no voice in their own fate." "A convenient abstraction," the Duke interjected, having evidently been listening. "You speak of those with power as if we're interchangeable pieces on a chessboard, rather than individuals navigating our own constraints." Constraints? Genevieve couldn't suppress her disbelief. What constraints could possibly bind the Duke of Harrowsby? Something flashed in his eyes, frustration, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she couldn't identify. "You presume much about a life you've observed only from a distance, Miss Whitcomb." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken by Dr. Whitcomb clearing his throat. "Perhaps we might turn to less contentious topics." "On the contrary," Lady Augusta said, "I find this refreshing." "Continue, Zachary. What constraints do you face that Miss Whitcomb fails to appreciate?" The Duke set down his wine glass deliberately. "Inheritance brings obligations as well as privileges. Every property, every business, every investment comes attached to families whose livelihoods depend on my stewardship. Change must be measured against stability." "A convenient excuse for maintaining an unjust status quo," Genevieve countered. "Is it?" His gaze locked with hers. "When I divested from the Lancashire mills, 300 workers lost their positions before I could arrange alternative employment. Their suffering weighs on my conscience far more than the criticism of moral absolutists who risk nothing in their pronouncements." Genevieve felt heat rise to her face. "You speak as though I write from ignorant privilege." "I assure you, Your Grace, I understand constraint intimately. As a woman, every aspect of my existence is constrained by laws and customs I had no voice in creating." "Yet you found your voice nonetheless," he observed. "As evidenced by both your published works and your letters to me." "At risk to my reputation and my father's livelihood," she replied. "What comparable risk have you faced in your reform efforts?" The table fell silent. Genevieve immediately regretted her words, aware she had overstepped propriety's bounds. To her surprise, the Duke smiled, not the condescending smile she expected, but one of genuine appreciation. "A fair question, and one I've asked myself. The answer is, too little. Which is precisely why I invited you here tonight." Before she could respond, he turned to her father. "Dr. Whitcomb, might I have your permission to show Miss Whitcomb my library after dinner? I have materials pertinent to our discussion." Though clearly uncomfortable with the unconventional request, her father nodded. "If Lady Augusta will accompany them." "I wouldn't miss it," the older woman declared with evident delight. The Duke's library was the most magnificent room Genevieve had ever entered. 2 stories tall, with a gallery running around the upper level, it contained thousands of volumes in gleaming leather bindings. A massive desk dominated one end, while comfortable seating areas were arranged throughout. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, unable to maintain her composure. "My grandfather's passion," Zachary explained. "He collected first editions of philosophical works. My father preferred political treatises." He gestured toward the desk. "Would you examine the documents there? I believe they may interest you." Lady Augusta settled into a wing chair near the fireplace, producing embroidery from a bag. "Don't mind me, dears. Proceed with your debate." Genevieve approached the desk warily. Spread across its surface were papers of various types, legal documents, correspondence, and what appeared to be financial records. Scanning them, she realized they detailed the Duke's systematic divestment from exploitative businesses and reinvestment in reform-minded enterprises. You've actually been addressing the very concerns I raised in my letters, she said, confused. For months before I began writing to you. 2 years, to be precise. He stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his sandalwood cologne. My father's death left me with a complex inheritance, including interests in businesses whose practices violated my principles. Unwinding such entanglements takes time. Then why not make your efforts public? Your influence could inspire others. Some changes are more effective when implemented quietly. He indicated another document. This is the deed to a new school in Whitechapel, funded anonymously. Public philanthropy too often becomes a performance of virtue rather than its practice. Genevieve studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. I may have judged you unfairly. As I may have misjudged your motives. His expression softened. I initially assumed you sought to shame or manipulate me. Now I believe you genuinely care about these issues. Of course I care. These aren't abstract principles to me. Emotion made her voice tremble slightly. My mother was a factory worker before she married my father. Her sisters still work in conditions that shorten their lives daily. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Hence your particular concern with factory reform. My Aunt Ellen died at 34, her lungs destroyed by cotton dust, Genevieve said quietly. She left 3 children who now work the same looms. Zachary's expression grew grave. Which factory? Millerton's, in Manchester. He moved to a writing desk, penning a quick note. Millerton's was among my inherited investments. I sold my interest 6 months ago to Lord Cunningham, who's shown little inclination toward improving conditions. The same Lord Cunningham from Lady Pembroke's salon. The same. His mouth tightened. I'll speak with him tomorrow. He's unlikely to be receptive to moral appeals, Genevieve observed. Perhaps not. But he's quite receptive to financial incentives. Zachary sealed the note. And I still control enough of his credit to command his attention. Genevieve stared at him, reassessing everything she had believed about the Duke of Harrowsby. You would do this for factory workers you've never met. I would do it because it's right, he replied simply. And because you've reminded me that reform delayed is reform denied. From her chair by the fire, Lady Augusta cleared her throat. While this policy discussion is fascinating, I believe Dr. Whitcomb will be wondering about our extended absence. Of course, Aunt. Zachary offered his arm to Genevieve. Shall we rejoin your father? As they walked toward the door, Genevieve glanced back at the documents on the desk, evidence of a man very different from the one she had imagined in her letters. The realization was both humbling and strangely exhilarating. In the weeks that followed, Genevieve found herself in the unprecedented position of corresponding openly with the Duke of Harrowsby. What began as an exchange of ideas about factory reform expanded to discussions of literature, philosophy, and their surprisingly compatible views on social progress. Each letter arrived with books or articles he thought might interest her, and she responded with her own recommendations and observations. Their correspondence became the highlight of her days, though she tried to moderate her growing anticipation whenever the post arrived. One afternoon, a package arrived containing a rare first edition of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. The accompanying note read simply, "For G.W., your pseudonymous writings deserve the company of like-minded revolutionaries. Z.W. Another gift from your Duke." Amelia teased, entering the sitting room as Genevieve reverently turned the book's pages. "He is not my Duke," Genevieve protested automatically, though with less conviction than before. "Tell that to your face whenever his letters arrive." Amelia sat beside her sister. "Father is beginning to notice, you know. He mentioned at breakfast that you've received more correspondence in a month than in the previous year." Genevieve sighed. "We share intellectual interests, nothing more. Intellectual interests that prompt him to send valuable books and have his carriage deliver letters rather than trusting the post. Amelia's eyebrows rose. Even father's patients don't receive such attention. Before Genevieve could respond, their housekeeper appeared. Miss Whitcomb, Lady Augusta Westmoreland has called and asks if you might receive her. Genevieve exchanged a startled glance with her sister. Of course. Please show her to the drawing room. Minutes later, she sat across from the Duke's aunt, whose penetrating gaze seemed to evaluate everything from the modest furnishings to Genevieve's simple afternoon dress. I've come without my nephew's knowledge, Lady Augusta began without preamble. He would disapprove of my interference, but I've never been one to await male approval before acting. A trait we share, it seems, Genevieve replied cautiously. Indeed. The older woman's lips curved slightly. Which is why I believe you should know that Zachary's correspondence with you has become the subject of gossip. Genevieve's stomach dropped. Gossip. Nothing malicious yet, but London thrives on speculation. A duke exchanging letters with an unmarried woman of modest background invites certain assumptions. We discuss ideas, not Genevieve faltered, unwilling to voice the implication. My dear, your intentions matter far less than appearances. Lady Augusta leaned forward. I've come to warn you that Lord Cunningham has been making insinuations about your relationship with my nephew. Cunningham. Genevieve's confusion deepened. Why would he concern himself with our correspondence? Because Zachary forced him to improve conditions at his Manchester factories and compensate workers with respiratory ailments. Lady Augusta's expression hardened. Cunningham suspects your influence and seeks revenge through the time-honored method of questioning a woman's reputation. Horror washed over Genevieve. But that's absurd. The Duke and I have never been alone together. Apart from your tete-a-tete in my presence in the library, Lady Augusta reminded her. Which, I assure you, Cunningham has recast in the most scandalous light possible. This is precisely why women remain silent on matters of public importance, Genevieve said bitterly. Any intellectual engagement with a man becomes twisted into impropriety. Yes, well, society fears intelligent women almost as much as it fears radical change. Lady Augusta studied her thoughtfully. The question is, what shall we do about it? We? Genevieve echoed. I've grown rather fond of you, Miss Whitcomb. More importantly, my nephew values your perspective in a way I've not previously witnessed. She straightened her already impeccable posture. I propose we address this situation directly, rather than allowing Cunningham to control the narrative. How? Genevieve asked, dreading the answer. By introducing you properly to society, as my protégé and Zachary's friend. Cunningham's insinuations lose power when brought into the light. Lady Augusta's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. I'm hosting a musical evening next week. You and your family shall attend as my honored guests. Genevieve's mind raced. Such an invitation would ordinarily be beyond imagination for someone of her station. Yet the thought of facing aristocratic scrutiny made her blood run cold. I appreciate your kindness, Lady Augusta, but perhaps it would be simpler if the Duke and I discontinued our correspondence. Simpler, perhaps. But would it be right? The older woman's gaze sharpened. Would you abandon a meaningful exchange of ideas because small-minded people misconstrue it? That seems contrary to the principles you espouse in your writings. Put that way, retreat felt like cowardice. Yet Genevieve couldn't shake her practical concerns. My father's practice depends on his reputation. I cannot risk damaging it. Dr. Whitcomb treats half the peerage, Lady Augusta replied dismissively. His reputation will only improve through association with Harrowsby House. She rose to leave. Consider my invitation, Miss Whitcomb. I shall send a formal card tomorrow. In the meantime, perhaps mention to my nephew that I called. I prefer to control when and how he discovers my meddling. After Lady Augusta departed, Genevieve sat motionless, the Wollstonecraft volume forgotten in her lap. What had begun as anonymous moral criticism had somehow evolved into a situation where her reputation, and by extension, her family's security, hung in the balance. More disturbing still was the realization that the prospect of ending her correspondence with the Duke affected her more deeply than concerns for her reputation.
When had Zachary Westmoreland's thoughts become so important to her?
Zachary paced his study, Lady Augusta's invitation to her musical evening crushed in his fist. "You invited the Whitcombs without consulting me." His aunt regarded him calmly from her seat by the window. "I wasn't aware I needed your permission to compile my guest list." "Don't play coy, Aunt. You know precisely why this is inappropriate. Because you developed feelings for the girl." Lady Augusta's directness stopped his pacing. "Or because you fear Cunningham's gossip will tarnish her reputation." Zachary ran a hand through his hair, a boyhood habit he'd never quite abandoned in moments of frustration. "Both. Neither. It's complicated. Love generally is," his aunt observed dryly. "I never said anything about love. You didn't need to. I've watched you these past weeks, Zachary. I know the signs." She softened her tone. "You light up when her letters arrive. You reference her opinions in conversation. You've even begun implementing some of her suggestions regarding your factory investments." Zachary sank into a chair. "She's brilliant, Aunt. Her mind challenges mine in ways I've never experienced." He stared at the crumpled invitation. "But she's also vulnerable to society's cruelty in ways I am not. Hence my invitation." Lady Augusta straightened her skirts. "If Miss Whitcomb appears at my musical evening as my personal guest, with you behaving as a respectful friend, we reframe the narrative before Cunningham's gossip takes root. And if she refuses—" "She hasn't yet. Though she shares your concerns for her family's standing." Lady Augusta rose. "What intrigues me, Zachary, is that neither of you has suggested the most obvious solution." He looked up sharply. "Which is?" "Marriage, of course." She smiled at his thunderstruck expression. "You're the Duke of Harrowsby. No one would dare question your choice of bride, regardless of her background." "Marriage? Aunt Augusta, we've never even—" He trailed off, suddenly picturing Genevieve as his duchess. The image was startlingly appealing. "Never even what?" "Spoken of love." His aunt chuckled. "Of course not. You've been too busy exchanging philosophical treatises and reform proposals. Some might call that courtship, Zachary, particularly when it involves expensive books and daily correspondence." "She would never accept," he said quietly. "Miss Whitcomb values her independence too highly." "Perhaps. Or perhaps she simply hasn't considered the possibility that marriage to the right person might expand her freedom rather than constrain it." Lady Augusta moved toward the door. "Think on it, Zachary. A duke with progressive ideals and a duchess with the intellect to help implement them, you could accomplish far more together than apart." After his aunt departed, Zachary sat motionless, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. Could Lady Augusta be right? Had his intellectual attraction to Genevieve evolved into deeper feelings? And if so, would she ever consider binding her fate to his? The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. The night of Lady Augusta's musical evening arrived with unseasonable warmth. Genevieve sat beside her father in the Whitcombs' modest carriage, her anxiety mounting with each passing street. "You're very quiet tonight," Dr. Whitcomb observed. "Having second thoughts?" "Several hundred of them," Genevieve admitted. "I'm not certain we belong in such company." Her father patted her hand. "Lady Augusta specifically requested our presence. Besides, I've treated enough aristocrats to know they bleed the same color as the rest of us." Amelia, seated opposite, practically vibrated with excitement. "I still can't believe we're attending an event at Harrowsby House. Will there be many eligible gentlemen, do you think?" "This isn't a marriage mart, Amelia," Genevieve chided. "It's a musical evening. Where the cream of society will gather," her sister countered. "Including your Duke." "He is not," Genevieve broke off as their carriage joined the queue approaching the mansion's illuminated entrance. Please remember that we're here at Lady Augusta's invitation, not the Duke's. Yet as they entered the grand reception hall, it was Zachary who greeted them, resplendent in evening attire that emphasized his tall, athletic build. "Dr. Whitcomb, Miss Whitcomb, Miss Amelia." He bowed, his gaze lingering on Genevieve. "Thank you for accepting my aunt's invitation." "Thank you for allowing us to intrude on your hospitality, Your Grace," Dr. Whitcomb replied. "No intrusion whatsoever. Indeed, your presence brings welcome diversity to our gathering." Zachary offered his arm to Genevieve.
"Might I escort you to my aunt?"
"She's eager to introduce you to several of her friends." As they moved through the crowded reception rooms, Genevieve felt the weight of curious gazes. Her gown, though her finest, was notably simpler than the elaborate creation surrounding her. Yet on the Duke's arm, she found herself standing straighter, meeting stares with quiet dignity. "Everyone is looking at us," she murmured. "Let them look," he replied, his voice low near her ear. "Though I suspect they're looking primarily at you. At my unfashionable gown, more likely. At the most intelligent woman in the room." His tone made her glance up in surprise. "You outshine every diamond-draped debutante here, Miss Whitcomb." Before she could formulate a response to this unprecedented compliment, they reached Lady Augusta, who was conversing with a distinguished-looking couple. "Ah, Zachary! And Miss Whitcomb, excellent." Lady Augusta performed introductions to Lord and Lady Thornfield, who regarded Genevieve with friendly interest. "Lady Augusta tells us you write for the Ladies' Quarterly," Lady Thornfield said. "Your piece on educational reform was most thought-provoking." Genevieve's surprise must have shown on her face, for Lady Thornfield smiled. "Yes, we know your GW. But fear not, your secret is safe among friends. Lady Thornfield serves on the board of the Girls' Educational Trust," Lady Augusta explained. "She's been implementing some of your recommendations at their schools." As the conversation flowed to educational topics, Genevieve gradually relaxed. Lady Augusta's strategy became clear as she was introduced to a series of influential figures who shared her reform interests. Each treated her with respect, creating a public association that would make future gossip more difficult to credit. Throughout the evening, Zachary remained attentively nearby, though not so close as to fuel speculation. He introduced her to political allies and steered her away from potential detractors with subtle skill. During the musical performances, Genevieve found herself seated beside him in the back row of chairs. As a soprano performed Schubert Lieder, he leaned slightly toward her. "Is the evening proving terribly uncomfortable?" he whispered. "Less so than I feared," she admitted. "Your aunt is formidable." "A family trait," he replied with a smile that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Cunningham, who took an empty seat on Genevieve's other side. "Miss Whitcomb," he murmured, his breath carrying the scent of brandy. "How delightful to see Westmoreland's pet reformer in the flesh." Zachary stiffened beside her, but Genevieve laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Lord Cunningham, I trust conditions at your Manchester factory have improved since the Duke's intervention." Cunningham's face darkened. "Meddling in men's business affairs now, are we? How progressive. Ensuring humane treatment of workers is everyone's business, my lord." Genevieve kept her voice level. "As is behaving civilly in polite company." "Civility?" Cunningham sneered. "Rich coming from a woman who corresponds inappropriately with a duke." Zachary began to rise, but Genevieve's grip tightened on his arm. "There's nothing inappropriate about intellectual exchange, Lord Cunningham. Though I understand such concepts might elude those whose intellectual faculties are compromised by excessive drink." Several nearby guests turned at Cunningham's sharp intake of breath. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You'll regret your impertinence, Miss Whitcomb. Your father's practice depends on the goodwill of families who won't appreciate his daughter's radical associations." Before she could respond, Lady Augusta materialized beside them. "Lord Cunningham, I believe your mother is seeking you. Something about your gambling debts." Her voice carried just far enough to reach nearby ears. causing a ripple of suppressed reaction. Cunningham rose, his face mottled with anger and embarrassment. "This isn't finished," he muttered before stalking away. "Charming as ever," Lady Augusta observed. "Miss Whitcomb, I believe Lady Thornfield was hoping to continue your discussion of the curriculum reforms." As Lady Augusta led her away, Genevieve glanced back to find Zachary watching her with an expression that sent warmth spreading through her chest. Pride? Admiration? Something more? Later, as the evening drew to a close, Genevieve found herself momentarily alone in the conservatory, having stepped away to collect her thoughts. The fragrance of exotic blooms filled the air, and moonlight streamed through the glass ceiling. "Seeking refuge from my aunt's matchmaking." Zachary's voice came from the doorway. Genevieve turned, smiling despite herself. "Is that what she's been doing? I thought she was introducing me to potential allies." "Both, I suspect." He approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "My aunt rarely pursues only one objective at a time." A family trait, she echoed his earlier words, earning a genuine laugh. "Indeed." His expression grew serious. "You handled Cunningham masterfully. Years of managing impertinent patients have given my father's daughter some practice with difficult men. Nevertheless, his threats concern me." Zachary moved to stand beside her, both of them gazing out at the moonlit garden beyond the glass. "Cunningham can be vindictive." "I won't be intimidated into silence," Genevieve said firmly. "Not by him, not by anyone. I never thought you would be." The admiration in his voice was unmistakable. "It's one of your most admirable qualities." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I've been thinking about our correspondence." Genevieve's heart sank. "You wish to discontinue it?" "Quite the opposite." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I wish to formalize it." "Formalize," she echoed, confused. "Miss Whitcomb, Genevieve, our exchange of ideas has become the most stimulating intellectual relationship of my life." His voice deepened with emotion. "I find myself thinking of your perspective on every issue I encounter, wondering what insights you might offer, what challenges you might raise." Genevieve's pulse quickened. "Your Grace, Zachary, please. At least in private." "Zachary." His name felt intimate on her lips. "I value our correspondence as well, but surely you see the impossibility of continuing under present circumstances." "Already there are rumors. Let me court you properly," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "No more rumors, no more anonymous letters. Let me call on you openly, with your father's permission." Genevieve stared at him, stunned. "Court me? But the difference in our stations means nothing to me." His green eyes were intense in the moonlight. "You've shown me that privilege confers responsibility, not superiority. You've challenged me to live according to principles I've always professed but sometimes failed to practice. I've also criticized you mercilessly," she reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. "You've held me accountable," he corrected. "As any true partner should." The word partner hung in the air between them, laden with implications that made Genevieve's head swim. "You cannot mean," she began. "I mean precisely what you think I mean." He stepped closer, still holding her hands. "I began by admiring your mind, Genevieve. Now I find myself admiring everything about you, your courage, your principles, your beauty." "My beauty," she echoed incredulously. "I'm a plain spinster of 28. "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever known," he said with such sincerity that her breath caught. "Not because of conventional features, but because of the passion and intelligence that illuminate you from within." Genevieve felt dizzy with conflicting emotions. "This is madness. You're the Duke of Harrowsby. You could marry any eligible young woman in England. I have no interest in any eligible young woman. I want a partner who challenges me, who helps me become a better man and a better duke." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms. "I want you, Genevieve Whitcomb, if you could ever consider me worthy of your affection." A laugh of disbelief escaped her.
If I could consider you worthy?
The entire situation is reversed.
Is it?
His expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps that's why we suit each other so well. Neither of us sees our own worth clearly, but we recognize it in each other. Before she could respond, voices approached the conservatory, breaking the intimate moment. Zachary reluctantly released her hands. "Think on what I've said," he murmured as they moved toward the door. "I'll call on your father tomorrow to request permission to court you formally." "And if I refuse?" she asked, needing to test his resolve. His smile held both humor and determination. "Then I shall have to persuade you, Miss Whitcomb. I can be quite persistent when pursuing matters of importance." As they rejoined the gathering, Genevieve felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The Duke wanted to court her, might even be contemplating marriage. It was beyond imagining, yet the sincerity in his eyes had been unmistakable. For a woman who had always valued her independence, the prospect should have been terrifying. Instead, she found herself contemplating a partnership that might actually expand rather than limit her horizons. The thought was as exhilarating as it was unprecedented. True to his word, Zachary called on Dr. Whitcomb the following afternoon. Genevieve, having spent a sleepless night contemplating possibilities, waited anxiously in her bedroom while the men spoke in her father's study. When Amelia burst in without knocking, her eyes wide with excitement, Genevieve knew the discussion had concluded. "The Duke of Harrowsby has asked father's permission to court you," Amelia exclaimed. "Officially, properly court you?" Genevieve's hands twisted in her lap. "And father's response?" "He said the decision rests with you, but he would not stand in the way if this is what you truly want." Amelia sat beside her sister on the bed. "Is it what you want, Jenny? Do you love him?" The question brought Genevieve up short. She had been so focused on the practical implications, the societal complications, that she hadn't fully examined her own heart. "I admire him greatly," she said slowly. "I value his mind, his principles, yes, all very proper," Amelia interrupted impatiently. "But does your heart beat faster when he enters a room? Do you find yourself thinking of him at odd moments? Do you imagine what it might be like to kiss him?" "Amelia!" Genevieve felt heat rise to her cheeks, which was answer enough for her sister. "You do love him." Amelia clapped her hands delightedly. "My sensible, practical sister has fallen in love with a duke. It's like something from a novel." "It's nothing of the sort," Genevieve protested, though without conviction. "And even if I do harbor feelings, there are practical considerations. The difference in our stations, the scandal it would cause, he's a duke," Amelia said flatly. "He makes the rules of society, not the other way around. Besides, he clearly doesn't care about your background." "He may not, but others will. Others like Lord Cunningham." Amelia's expression darkened. "Father received a note from the Ethersage this morning cancelling their appointments. Apparently, Lord Cunningham has been spreading rumors about your inappropriate relationships with the Duke." Genevieve felt sick. "It's beginning already, then?" "Yes, but father says it doesn't matter. Lady Augusta called personally this morning to refer 3 new patients from among her friends." Amelia took her sister's hands. "Don't you see? The Duke's interest protects us far more than it endangers us." A knock at the door interrupted them. Their father entered, his expression a mixture of concern and affection. "The Duke awaits your answer in the drawing room," he said gently. "Though you needn't decide immediately if you wish more time to consider." Genevieve rose, smoothing her skirts. "No, I should speak with him now." Dr. Whitcomb studied his eldest daughter. "He seems a good man, Genevieve. Despite his title. He spoke of you with genuine respect." "He is a good man," she agreed. "Better than I initially believed." "Then perhaps you should judge this situation with the same openness to revision." Her father smiled. "You've always had an exceptional mind, my dear. Trust your heart to show equal wisdom." Gathering her courage, Genevieve descended to the drawing room, where Zachary stood gazing out the window. He turned at her entrance, his expression brightening in a way that made her heart skip. "Your father has granted permission for me to court you," he said without preamble. "Pending your consent, of course." Genevieve clasped her hands to still their trembling. "It would cause a scandal." "I'm prepared for that." "Your peers would disapprove." "Some would. Others, whose opinion I actually value, would not." He stepped closer. "Any other objections? Our backgrounds are entirely different. Yet our principles align on matters of true importance." "Another step." "Continue." "I'm finding your objections increasingly insubstantial." Despite her nerves, Genevieve smiled. "You're very confident, Your Grace." "Only because I recognize the difference between genuine objections and fear disguised as practicality." He was close enough now that she could see the different shades of green in his eyes. "Tell me truthfully, Genevieve. Do you feel nothing for me beyond intellectual respect?" Put so directly, she couldn't prevaricate. "No," she admitted softly. "I feel a great deal more." His smile was like sunrise. "Then the rest is simply details to be managed." "Details like society's censure? Your family's disappointment?" "The difference in our circumstances. My family consists primarily of Aunt Augusta, who adores you. Society will follow my lead or be denied access to Harrowsby patronage. And as for our circumstances," he took her hand gently. "I offer partnership, not charity. Your intellect, your principles, your perspective would enhance the influence and effectiveness of the dukedom immeasurably." Genevieve studied his earnest face. "You truly believe that?" "With every fiber of my being." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth cascading through her. "Say yes, Genevieve. Allow me to court you properly, to show you that a life together would bring freedom rather than constraint." In that moment, looking into his eyes, Genevieve recognized the truth that had been growing in her heart since their first honest conversation. This man, this duke, saw her fully, valued her mind, respected her principles, and desired her partnership. "Yes," she said simply. His smile was radiant. "Yes, you'll allow me to court you." "Yes." She returned his smile, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Though I warn you, I'm unlikely to become less opinionated or outspoken." "I should hope not," he replied, his eyes dancing. "Your opinions and outspokenness are precisely what drew me to you." He hesitated, then added softly, "Though I hope, in time, they might be joined by deeper feelings." Genevieve felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I believe that process may already have begun, Your Grace." "Zachary," he corrected gently. "If we're to court properly, you must use my given name." "Zachary," she repeated, savoring the intimacy of it. They stood there, hands joined, gazing at each other with growing understanding and affection. The journey that had begun with an anonymous letter had led them to a place neither could have anticipated, the threshold of a partnership that promised to transform not only their lives but potentially the lives of many others. "I believe this is where I should take my leave," Zachary said reluctantly. "Propriety dictates a measured pace for our courtship, despite my desire to spend every moment in your company." "Propriety has its uses," Genevieve agreed, though she made no move to release his hands. "Though perhaps not as many as society believes." His laugh was warm with affection. "Already planning to reform courtship conventions, Miss Whitcomb?" "One institution at a time, Your Grace." She smiled up at him. "We have a lifetime for reforms." The implication hung in the air between them, acknowledged in his answering smile and the gentle pressure of his fingers against hers. "A lifetime. Together." "Until tomorrow, then," he said softly. "Until tomorrow." As he departed, Genevieve stood in the drawing-room window, watching his tall figure stride to his waiting carriage. A future she had never imagined now stretched before her, not as the anonymous critic of a distant duke, but as the chosen partner of a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. A secret letter had indeed changed everything.